necessarily just today, but if we're looking at this month that's been and that's coming up, is absolutely jam-packed with bike races. So the teams need the riders. Necessarily just today, but if we're looking at this month that's been and that's coming up, is absolutely jam-packed with bike races. So the teams need the riders, to be able to field them, and especially in this particular season as well, with the relegation system that's in place now. The points are so vital for every single team out there, and with that, you got to bring the guys in to race possibly more frequently than what we've seen in previous years.
That is a very interesting discussion that we'll get in to a little bit later, because this team, Israel Premier Tech, is actually in the relegation. Our first climb of the day is happening as we speak. It's called Col de la Colmiane, Col de Saint-Martin. We know this from races like Paris-Nice, Tour de France, of course, in the past. It's 7.5 kilometers long, 7.2% average, with a nice little easy start going percentages of 4. And then halfway, it kind of starts halfway when we have the intermediate sprint that comes up.
You never quite know when he's going to put that move in.
That's exactly what he did in the Tour de France, of course, last year.
Yeah.
In the Vuelta, he was in an absolute great position and then crashed out, and the next day lost so much time. Eventually managed to stay inside the top 10 despite that rather big crash. But yeah, that's how he does it. Just being part of those breakaways, in these middle stages where you get 8, 9, 10, 11 minutes on the peloton, and then he makes the jump up in the GC again. But his biggest wish is, of course, winning a stage in the Tour de France. That means so much more than being 7th or 8th or 9th in the GC.
Yeah, I mean, a stage win is always a stage win. So, and especially at the Tour, that is huge, and especially for a Frenchman as well. Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know if the point score system has ever worked. Even if we go back a number of years now to back when I started racing in my career, that it was still didn't quite work then, and I don't think it's working now either. And especially when you hear stats like that, where you're almost better off choosing not to do a Grand Tour, which is just it's just really quite strange in my mind, that there should be so many more points on offer in a Grand Tour, because it is harder to win a stage there. And obviously if you're on GC or somewhere placed on GC, that should carry a lot of weight with it as well. Not that I want necessarily for everything to turn into be about the Grand Tours either, but it does need a serious look at if we're going to have this relegation system where you need to.
Arkea Samsic had 4 riders in the top 7, and they scored more points in that one day, a Pro Series one-day race, than most of the teams in 3 weeks of Giro d'Italia.
Yeah, and I don't think that's right. And we're also getting to this point now where the teams are not necessarily riding for the win either, but actually placing riders.
Yeah.
If we have 3 in the top 10, that gives us a far better point score than it does if we win. And that's, I think, is a dangerous way of starting to run the sport, really. If we just go for placings on an individual day, like a one-day race, or even a stage race where it's just all about the numbers towards the front of the race, then we're taking away some of the action and some of the Chris can do. And he's one of those riders I so desperately want to see back at some sort of level, closer to where he was at. If he's ever going to get back to his former level after that horrendous crash, I don't know. It remains to be seen, but I would like to see him back at least at the pointy end of the bike races, and being able to play that I would say super domestique role, in that he's got so much experience in the Grand Tours and in pretty much any bike race, really.
Even if he managed to do that, but having the experience of the likes of Chris Froome, and I think he's also the kind of guy who can actually share that experience. Not every champion is a great coach or a great potential sports director, but I think he also can share his experience. But despite everything that you've been through, and then still finding the fighting spirit to his good performances, showing a lot of potential for the future. But it took 8 weeks before he finally is back at this level with the Movistar team. So I'm looking forward to see what Matteo Jorgensen can do in this race. I think he can do a top 10. I hope he can. $80 kilometers to go. The breakaway riders, our 5 leaders, are almost at the top of our first climb. It's not the highest of the day. The highest point is Valberg. The first time is 1,673 meters above sea level. Then we go down and then we climb Valberg from the other side again, but then it's 3 meters lower. So only for the record, the first climb is going to be the highest one. People on bike computers, you always have a different reference. I always have, which is to the east of the continent, bordering Brazil and Suriname, Guyana, still a French territory. They're almost at the top of the climb as well. The rest of the peloton, we see Thibaut Pinot there in the peloton, and also David Gaudu. Pinot said something interesting after Tour de Romandie, that it was actually the first time in a while that he felt like a bike rider again. He was 13th in the GC, 5th in the uphill finish in stage 4. That was a serious mountain stage in Switzerland there, from Aigle to Val d'Anivier. And 5th also, 6th in the time trial. And after that race, he said, I finally feel like I'm back on track.
Yeah, it's taken him a bit of time, but it's good that he's finding that sensation again. To
I don't have all the.
Don't have those stats in my head either. 85 actually. Yeah, I was right the first time. 85 was the last time a French rider won the Tour de France. So yeah, if somebody shows promise like Thibaut Pinot did, there's so much pressure coming with that. And at a certain point, he says, I prefer racing the Giro because I don't have the French press around me all the time. I can totally understand where he's coming from, and that, it definitely can't be easy to deal with that pressure.
We are at the top of the climb with our peloton as well. 112 riders took the start. At the end of the morning, 11:50.
Coming from a training camp and having done the mileage and the altitude meters that we've heard some of the riders have done, it's not necessarily, the duration of the race and the length of it isn't necessarily what's gonna hurt you. It's more the sort of the pace of it, and okay, it's been controlled so far, but it's still controlled at a high speed. So I think that's what's going to start wearing the riders down more than anything else.
The weather today, about 22 degrees in the valley and about 14 up the climbs. There was reported a few ravals, so a few gusts of wind on top of the climb.
Consider. Whereas I think, had it been a stage race, I doubt we would have seen Martin go so early on the final climb.
No, because there's always the next day.
Yeah, you've got to think about the long game in that one, and if you do that kind of an early attack on the final climb, and you don't have the legs, and you start struggling, a quarter of the way up it or halfway up the mountain, then you could end up losing a ton of time to your main rivals for the GC. So it's very interesting to see a one-day race looking like this.
Of course, in 2 weeks' time, we have the Mont Ventoux Challenge, sadly not on GCN this year, but that's also the same kind of race going up Ventoux for the sprinters to prepare for the Tour de France. We're going to see a lot of sprints in the Netherlands in the ZLM Tour and in Belgium in the Tour of Belgium, although we have some Ardennes / Spring Classics kind of stages. We have some one-day races coming up, and then of course basically you don't have to do anything from the 1st of July until the last day of July, because it's 4 weeks. It's Tour de France and Tour de France Femmes. I'm going to bring you that every day with, of course, your best dance troupe ever from the breakaway. I wonder what Orla comes up with come the Tour de France, the stakes and the expectation.
I'm not sure whether my dance skills are up to scratch, actually.
You've got 2 daughters. They are of the TikTok generation.
Yeah, I bet they
63 kilometers to go. Gap is still 3.5 minutes, and our first group is almost in the valley. 3 kilometers to go for the descent. This is, of course, the peloton.
My lines were usually slightly different to other riders, and if I had someone in front of me, it sort of took my eye off a little bit on my particular lines through the corners.
And in what way were they different?
Usually I sort of turned in a lot later into the corners than most riders did, so a slightly slower entry speed but a lot faster. If their tyres stick to the ground, then mine are as well, and as long as they go through the corner, I'm going to as well, so they didn't have to think too much.
61 kilometers to go in this second edition of the Mercan'Tour Classique Alpes-Maritimes from Puisieux-Tigné to Valberg, the ski station there.
That we ride. So, and it's certainly very entertaining when it's that way.
Yeah, and remarkably enough, we had 3 weeks of Giro, and then, of course, the stage on Saturday was, I called it the Milan-San Remo of Grand Tour stages. The last 3 kilometers were incredibly exciting with Carapaz and Jai Hindley, but the rest of it was a snooze fest. But it almost, as us as viewers and as fans, expect it to be full gas, Mathieu van der Poel, explosive racing every day, and that is also not possible.
No, it's not. But I think, you know, if we look back at the Giro, it was exciting racing most days. Not necessarily for the GC, but for the stage wins, it was pretty fiercely contested on most days.
So I'm completely ready to bring you all sorts of Belgian traditions, and give you all the insight on that. Comes with the job. Watching 4 kids on a wooden horse 7 meters up, parading through a town. Yeah, it was fascinating. 54 kilometers to go, going off a incredibly random tangent here, but the gap is now coming down fast. It's 1.5 minutes when the work now is done by the troops of Israel, Premier Tech, with Chris Froome there in 3rd position. And the upcoming month and a half, 2 months, actually.
2 months almost.
2 months. Alpine climbs, love them.
I wonder whether, you know, the fact that we've had Warbas and Delacroix kind of drop off the pace a little bit in that breakaway, if that's you know, because we're down to that minute and 18 seconds here now, they're thinking it's not really worth expending
in power between your left and your right leg. You lose so much time, and that's the case with Jungels. But yeah, he is optimistic about returning to his form and preparing for the Tour de France via this race and the Tour of Switzerland. King of the Mountains, Jeff Bouchard, and Anton Shewanti, Jan Bakelands is here. Kobe Goossens is an interesting name to look out for, the former cyclocross rider. Louis Mankies, Hugo Page and Georg Zimmermann. So there's some potential in the Belgian team as well. And yeah, who knows, Theo de la Croix can pick up some bottles at the team car, drop them off at his teammates, save them some energy, because we're only halfway, not even.
Well, at the moment, it looks like the Israel Premier Tech are trying to set a fairly strong pace. So I think they will continue pushing the way that they are. Whether they use any more riders on this climb, I'm not sure, because the final climb is still fairly significant. So normal tactics don't really come into play. So yeah, well,
I got a question on Twitter whether we want to go to miles, but I'm not brought up in that system. I even heard that you go back to the imperial system in the UK, Magnus, so start calculating.
Yeah, that's never going to work for me, I'm afraid.
Oh well. Here's Chris Froome. Junior race. Xander Schauffele and Tim Wellens, who, well, just got dropped. Tim Wellens is returning to the Tour de France. That was my point here, despite the fact that he said a while ago that he didn't want to go there anymore. Also, Thomas de Gent says that he wants to continue another 3 years until the Giro d'Italia finishes on the Stelvio, where he had his biggest success ever.
Yeah.
2025.
Why not? I think, as long as you enjoy riding your bike and you still enjoy the training, and okay, there are obviously days where it's more fun than others, but as long as you enjoy being in the peloton, you go there, you stay in the sport for as long as you possibly can, because the day you step out of it, there's just no way back. So yeah, don't pull the plug too early.
Sebastian Schoenberger of the B&B Hotels team, and Valentin Ferron, the Frenchman of Team Total Energie. In the peloton, the gap towards our three leaders is stable at around the 115, 120, 125 mark, with a lot of work done by the Israel Premier Tech team. They're here with Michael Woods.
Not too many during the summer. Obviously, it's responsible for the cyclocross side of that team.
Yeah, let's not get into that. It's 20 degrees plus. So
yeah,
despite the fact that Magnus and I could talk cyclocross for hours, we're not going into that today. Lotto Soudal have two riders in this first group as well. There they are, Andreas Kroon and also Stef Kras, two of the riders in the red of... it's not that much different. Of course, the field is different, but... in the Tour of Turkey, we had the likes of Paddy Bevin, Harm van Hoeken, Nairo Quintana, Jay Vine, Nicolas Eder, Johannessen, all in the top 10. So that kind of shows that